My name is Catherine Morrison, and I'm 70 years old. For most of my life, I believed that love and sacrifice were the foundation of family. I spent decades building bridges between people, mending broken relationships, holding everyone together with my bare hands. But on a cold November evening, standing in the gleaming lobby of the Belmont Grand Hotel, I learned something that shattered every illusion I had carefully constructed. Sometimes the people you love most are the ones who see you as nothing more than an obstacle to their ambitions. The marble floor beneath my feet was so polished I could see my reflection, distorted and small. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen waterfalls, casting light that felt too bright, too revealing. I had come here with hope in my heart, hope that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe my daughter would smile when she saw me. Maybe we could share a meal, talk about something other than money or the growing distance between us. Maybe I could remind her that I was still her mother, still the woman who had stayed up all night when she had nightmares, still the person who had sold everything to give her the education she demanded. But hope, I've learned, can be a dangerous thing. I saw her immediately. My daughter Vivienne sat at a premium table near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights twinkling behind her like she was the star of her own movie. Her husband Marcus sat beside her, both of them dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. There were other people at the table, business associates, judging by their calculated smiles and expensive watches. My heart lifted for just a moment. Maybe I could just say hello, meet her colleagues, show her I supported her success, remind her that I was proud of the woman she had become. I was maybe 15 feet away when Vivienne saw me. The transformation was instant and terrifying. Her polished smile vanished, replaced by something cold and sharp, something that made my stomach drop. She stood up so quickly, her chair scraped against the floor, the sound cutting through the soft piano music like a knife. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was loud, deliberately loud, heads turned throughout the restaurant. "Are you stalking me now?" I stopped walking. "Vivienne, I just wanted to—" "This is a private dinner with important clients." She gestured at my simple cotton dress and worn cardigan with visible disgust. "And you show up looking like some homeless woman who wandered in off the street." The words hit me like physical blows. I could feel every pair of eyes in that restaurant on me, judging, assessing. "I only wanted to see you," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. "I thought maybe we could talk after your dinner." Vivienne reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a handful of cash. She didn't hand it to me, she threw it. $500 scattered across the polished marble floor like garbage, like I was some beggar she needed to pay off to make disappear. "Take it and get out," she hissed. "This is a 5-star hotel, not a shelter for lonely old women. You're embarrassing me." I looked past her, searching for Marcus. My son-in-law sat there with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding mine. A man who had called me mom at his wedding, who had thanked me tearfully for accepting him into our family, sat there like a stranger, watching a scene that had nothing to do with him. "Marcus," my voice cracked on his name. He finally looked at me, and there was nothing in his eyes, no warmth, no recognition of the woman who had welcomed him, who had helped them when they were struggling newlyweds, who had babysat their daughter so they could build their careers. "Catherine," he said flatly, using my first name like I was a stranger. "You really shouldn't have come. You're not welcome here." The restaurant had gone completely silent. Every guest was watching. I could feel their stares, like heat on my skin. Slowly, carefully, I bent down and picked up the scattered bills. My hands trembled, but I wouldn't let them see my face crumble. I straightened my back, folded the money, and placed it in my pocket. Then I walked toward the exit, with my head held high, because dignity was the only thing I had left, and I would not let them take that too. In the lobby, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I rarely used. My voice was steady when I spoke, steadier than I felt. "Daniel, this is Catherine Morrison. I need you to handle something for me tonight. The Ashford party in the Diamond Suite. Revoke their VIP access immediately." I drove home through empty streets, my hands steady on the wheel, even though something inside me had cracked open and was bleeding where no one could see. The $500 sat folded in my pocket like a wound. I thought about throwing it out the window, letting it scatter across the highway for strangers to find, but my late husband Thomas would have told me that was foolish. Thomas would have said money is just paper until you decide what it means. So I kept it, and I drove through the dark city I had watched grow from a small town into a metropolis, and I tried not to think about the look in my daughter's eyes when she told me I wasn't welcome. My apartment was small and quiet, the kind of place people expected a widow to live. 2 bedrooms, one of which I had converted into a sewing room filled with quilts I made for charity and photographs of bridges Thomas had helped design when he was still alive. The other bedroom still had his reading chair by the window because I couldn't bring myself to move it. I sat down in my own chair across from his empty one and looked at the space where he used to sit with his engineering journals and his coffee, and I wondered what he would say if he could see what our family had become. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang. Daniel Cross. The name on the screen was a man I hadn't spoken to in months. "It's done," he said without preamble. Their key cards were deactivated at 11:42. Mrs. Ashford made quite a scene at the front desk. She demanded to speak with management, threatened lawsuits, called our night staff incompetent. I handled it personally. I closed my eyes. What did you tell them? The truth. That there was a security concern involving a stakeholder dispute, and hotel policy required their immediate departure. Daniel paused. Your daughter asked what stakeholders I was referring to. I informed her that her mother holds significant interests in this property. I believe she was genuinely surprised, Mrs. Morrison. She had no idea. Of course she had no idea. Vivian knew nothing about my investments, my silent partnerships, the quiet ways Thomas and I had built a comfortable life over 40 years of careful planning and hard work. She knew only what she wanted to believe, that I was a retired seamstress living on a pension, a burden to be managed, an embarrassment to be hidden away. There's something else, Daniel continued. Someone in the restaurant tonight recorded Mrs. Ashford's outburst. The video is circulating on social media. It's gaining significant attention. After we hung up, I found the video myself. It wasn't difficult. By then, it had been shared thousands of times with captions like, "Rich woman throws money at elderly mother," and "Someone identify this poor woman so we can help her." I watched my own humiliation play out on a 6-inch screen. Saw myself bend down to pick up those scattered bills. Saw Vivian standing over me with contempt written across her beautiful face. Saw Marcus sitting motionless while his wife screamed at me. The comments were a strange kind of comfort. Thousands of strangers were defending me, calling Vivian cruel and heartless, demanding to know who I was so they could help. One comment said, "That woman has more dignity in her little finger than that spoiled brat has in her whole body." Another said, "I hope she's someone important and this entitled witch just destroyed herself." I wondered if Vivian had seen the video yet. I wondered if she understood that the internet never forgets, that her perfectly curated image was now forever stained by 60 seconds of recorded cruelty. I wondered if Marcus was reading those comments too, seeing his wife through the eyes of strangers who recognized what he had somehow forgotten, that I was a human being who deserved basic respect. I set down my phone and picked up a photograph from the side table. Thomas smiled at me from behind the glass, his eyes bright with the warmth that had sustained me for 42 years of marriage. He had worried about Vivian's choices. Not just Marcus, but the lifestyle they pursued, the values they seemed to abandon in their chase for status and wealth. Late at night, when we couldn't sleep, he would say things like, I'm afraid we're losing her, Catherine. I'm afraid she's becoming someone we won't recognize. I should have listened more carefully. I should have fought harder while Thomas was still alive, to fight beside me. But I had believed that love was enough, that mother-daughter bonds couldn't be broken by ambition or a husband who encouraged the worst parts of her personality. I had been wrong about many things, but I wasn't wrong about everything. I still had resources, I still had allies, and I still had time to show my daughter exactly who her mother really was. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it and read the words twice before their meaning settled into my mind. Mrs. Morrison, my mother always said you saved our family when we had nothing. Now it's my turn. DC. DC. Daniel Cross. I stared at the initials, searching my memory for a connection I couldn't quite grasp. Daniel was in his early 40s, which meant his mother would have been my age, a contemporary, someone from my past. The name Cross stirred something in the back of my mind, a faint echo of a story I had nearly forgotten, but the details wouldn't come. My eyes were too tired to keep searching. I looked at Thomas's photograph one more time. "What did you set in motion, my love?" I whispered to his silent smile. "What else did you prepare that I don't know about yet?" The photograph offered no answers, but somewhere in this city, Daniel Cross was watching over me for reasons I didn't yet understand. And somewhere in a hotel, they could no longer enter. My daughter and son-in-law were learning that the old woman they had humiliated was not as powerless as they believed. I turned off the lights and sat in the darkness, waiting for morning to bring whatever came next. Sleep did not come that night. I sat in my chair until the first gray light of dawn crept through the curtains, my mind turning over memories I had tried for years to bury. Daniel Cross's message glowed in my thoughts like an ember that wouldn't die. His mother had said I saved their family, but I couldn't remember saving anyone. I could barely remember saving myself during those long years when survival meant working until my bones ached and my fingers bled from endless sewing, all while watching my husband fight battles neither of us could win. Thomas was 35 when the construction accident happened. A scaffolding collapse on a bridge project in the northern part of the state. 5 workers fell that day. 3 died instantly. Thomas survived, but his legs didn't. The doctor said he would never walk again without assistance, that chronic pain would be his constant companion, that his days as a structural engineer working on site were over. Vivian was only 8 years old, too young to understand why her father came home in a wheelchair, too young to know that our entire world had just shattered. I was working as a seamstress then, taking in alterations and custom orders. Decent work, but nowhere near enough for what we faced. Medical bills piled up faster than any salary could match. Physical therapy, medications, specialists, equipment to make our home accessible. The costs were endless and crushing. So I took more work. I sewed wedding dresses at night after Vivian went to bed. I did alterations for 3 different bridal shops. I made costumes for the community theater and quilts for the church fundraisers and curtains for anyone who would pay me. For 12 years, I lived like that. 12 years of watching my husband struggle with pain and depression. 12 years of raising a daughter in fragments between my shifts at the sewing machine. 12 years of telling myself things would get better. And eventually, they did. Thomas adapted. He went back to school, got certified in structural engineering design software, became a consultant working from home. His income stabilized. Vivian graduated high school, then college, then business school. She became successful, confident, everything I had sacrificed for her to become, and she was grateful. That's what I need to remember now, when the bitterness threatens to consume me. Before Marcus, Vivian was grateful. She visited every week, called every evening just to check in, sent cards on Mother's Day with handwritten notes that said things like, "I know what you gave up for me, Mom. I'll never forget." She brought boyfriends home to meet us, asked for my advice on career decisions, helped me care for Thomas when his health declined. She was my daughter and I was her mother, and the bond between us felt unbreakable. Then she met Marcus Ashford in 2008. He was handsome, ambitious, polished in ways that made Thomas uneasy from the first introduction. I dismissed my husband's concerns as paternal protectiveness. Marcus came from old money, had connections, spoke 4 languages, and looked at Vivian like she was the most fascinating woman in the world. What mother wouldn't want that for her daughter? They married within a year, a lavish wedding that Marcus's family paid for because we certainly couldn't afford it. I wore a dress I had sewn myself and watched my daughter promise to love this man forever, and I believed that her happiness was all that mattered. The changes came slowly. Weekly visits became monthly. Daily calls became weekly, then bi-weekly, then only when Vivian needed something. Marcus always had reasons. They were traveling for business. They were renovating their new penthouse. They were exhausted from social obligations. I was never invited to attend. Thomas would sit by the phone on Sunday evenings, waiting for a call that rarely came. And I would see the hurt in his eyes that he tried so hard to hide from me. "She's busy building her life," I would tell him. "She'll come back to us when things settle down." But things never settled down. The distance only grew. And by the time Thomas died 3 years ago, Vivian had become a stranger who sent an enormous flower arrangement to his funeral, but couldn't find time to help me sort through his belongings or sit with me during the worst days of my grief. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I drove to the cemetery that Sunday morning, as I did every week, regardless of weather or health. Thomas's headstone was simple, gray granite, engraved with his name and the dates that bookended his life. I knelt on the grass and told him everything: the hotel, the money thrown at my feet, the coldness in Vivian's eyes, the video that was probably still circulating online. "You always worried about her," I whispered to the carved letters of his name. "You saw something I refused to see. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I let her drift so far away from us." The wind stirred the leaves of a nearby oak tree, and for a moment I imagined it was Thomas answering me. Then my phone rang, shattering the silence. The name on the screen was Patricia Hammond, the attorney Thomas had insisted I hire years ago to manage our estate planning. Patricia had been my close friend since our college days, and she had promised Thomas before he died that she would watch over me, protect me from making foolish decisions in my grief. I answered the call expecting routine paperwork or a question about tax documents. Instead, Patricia's voice was tight with urgency. "Catherine, we need to meet, today if possible. Someone has been accessing your secondary account, the emergency fund you set up years ago. There have been large withdrawals over the past 18 months. $43,000 total." My chest tightened. "Withdrawals? I haven't touched that account in years." There was a pause. When Patricia spoke again, her voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Catherine, the transactions trace back to Vivian's personal accounts. Your daughter has been siphoning money for over a year. We need to talk about what you want to do." Patricia Hammond's office occupied the 12th floor of a downtown building that Thomas had helped design 25 years ago. I remembered watching the construction, remembered his pride when the steel skeleton rose against the skyline. Now I rode the elevator to meet with his oldest friend, carrying the weight of a betrayal I still couldn't fully comprehend. My own daughter, $43,000, 18 months of lies. Patricia was waiting for me in her conference room, a stack of documents already spread across the polished table. She was 68 years old, silver hair cut in a sharp bob, her face carrying the kind of focused intelligence that made her one of the most respected estate attorneys in the region. Thomas had trusted her completely, and in the years since his death, Patricia had become something like family to me. the sister I never had, the guardian Thomas had appointed to watch over me when he could no longer do it himself. "Sit down, Catherine," she said gently. "This is going to be difficult to hear." I sat. She slid the first document toward me, a bank statement from my secondary account. The emergency fund I had established years ago and rarely touched. The account I had added Vivienne to as an authorized user when little Sophie was born, so she could access money for her daughter's needs if something ever happened to me. A gesture of trust. A mother's faith in her child. The withdrawals started 18 months ago. Small amounts at first. 700 here, 1,000 there. Easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. But over time, they escalated. 3,000 in March of last year, 5,000 in August, 7,000 in December. The total is $43,216, Patricia said, her finger tracing down the column of transactions. She looked up at me. "Where did the money go?" Patricia hesitated. I had a forensic accountant trace the transfers. None of it went to Sophie, not a single dollar. She pulled out another document. Vivienne and Marcus have been struggling financially for over 3 years. Their lifestyle expenses exceed their legitimate income by a significant margin. Marcus made poor investment decisions during the market downturn, and they've been hemorrhaging money trying to maintain appearances. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Specifically, there's evidence of high-stakes gambling. Private poker games at exclusive clubs. Online sports betting. A disastrous weekend in Monte Carlo last year. Marcus has debts to people who don't accept excuses. Gambling. My son-in-law, who presented himself as a savvy businessman, who wore $1,000 suits and drove luxury cars, was a gambler. The irony was so bitter, I could taste it. "There's more," Patricia continued. "A significant portion of the funds, nearly $20,000, went to cover losses from business ventures registered in Vivienne's name. Shell companies, Catherine. Businesses that existed on paper but never actually operated. She was funneling money somewhere, and when those ventures collapsed, they used your account to fill the holes." I sat back in my chair, my mind racing through implications I didn't want to face. "How long have you known about this?" "I've been monitoring your account since Thomas asked me to, years before he passed. I noticed the irregularities 8 months ago, but I wanted to gather enough evidence before bringing it to you." Patricia's voice softened. "I also wanted to give you time to grieve, Catherine. You had just lost your husband. I didn't want to destroy your relationship with your daughter on top of everything else. What are my options?" She straightened, shifting into her professional demeanor. "Legally, this constitutes breach of fiduciary duty. Vivienne was given authorized access for a specific purpose, Sophie's welfare, and she violated that trust for personal gain. We could pursue civil action to recover the funds. Depending on how aggressively we present the evidence, we might even have grounds for fraud charges." I considered this for a long moment. The lawyer in my mind, the part Thomas had taught to think strategically, calculated damages and remedies. But the mother in my heart couldn't stop seeing Vivienne at 8 years old, crying because her father couldn't walk anymore, asking me why bad things happen to good people. "Not yet," I finally said. "I need to understand how deep this goes. Prepare the documentation, but take no action. I want to know everything before I decide anything." Patricia nodded, unsurprised. She knew me well enough to expect caution over impulse. "There's something else I think you should know. Something I discovered while investigating Vivienne's financial irregularities." I looked up. "You asked me once, years ago, to look into Marcus's background before the wedding. I didn't find much at the time. His family kept a low profile, and he had scrubbed most of his personal history from public records. But these financial irregularities gave me new threads to pull." Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. "Marcus's father is still alive, Catherine. His name is Jonathan Ashford. He's 76 years old, living in a nursing home in rural Connecticut. He's been there for 16 years. The information landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples I couldn't yet trace. 16 years? But Marcus told us his father died before they got married. He said his mother passed when he was young, and his father died shortly after. He lied, Patricia said flatly. Jonathan Ashford is very much alive, though from what I've gathered, he might as well be dead to his son. Marcus obtained sole power of attorney over his father's assets shortly after his mother passed away. Within 8 months, he sold his father's house, liquidated his investments, and placed him in a long-term care facility 400 miles from anyone who knew him. NP. I felt something cold settle in my chest. He did it for the money. She cursed him because he did it for control. The money was just a bonus. Patricia leaned forward. Catherine, I'm telling you this because I see a pattern. Marcus isolated his father, took everything he had, and erased him from his life. He's been isolating you from Vivienne for years. And now, through your daughter, he's accessing your finances. NP. She held my gaze. I think you need to consider the possibility that what he did to his father, he's planning to do to you. I left Patricia's office with a folder of documents and a heart full of questions I wasn't ready to answer. The elevator descended 12 floors, and with each passing number, I felt the world I thought I understood crumbling around me. My daughter was a thief, my son-in-law was something far worse, and somewhere in Connecticut, an old man sat forgotten in a nursing home, abandoned by the same son who was now circling me like a predator waiting for weakness. My phone rang as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The name on the screen made my breath catch. Sophie. Grandma. Her voice was thin, frightened. Can I come see you tomorrow? I found something about Dad and what he's planning. I think you need to see it before it's too late. I think you need to see it before it's too late. Sophie arrived at my apartment the next afternoon, her hands clutching something both precious and dangerous. She was only 14, but the girl who stood in my doorway looked older somehow, her young face carrying shadows that didn't belong there. I remembered her as a baby, remembered the first time Vivienne placed her in my arms, remembered the way her tiny fingers had wrapped around mine and held on, as if she already knew that some people in this world could be trusted and others could not. Come in, sweetheart, I said, stepping aside to let her pass. She moved into my living room with the nervous energy of someone who had been carrying a heavy secret for too long. Her eyes darted around the apartment, lingering on the photograph of Thomas that sat on the mantel, before she finally settled onto the edge of the sofa. I sat across from her and waited. Whatever she had come to tell me, she needed to find her own way to the words. I'm sorry, Grandma, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, for what happened at the hotel, for the way Mom treated you, for Dad just sitting there and doing nothing, her hands twisted in her lap. I wanted to say something. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone that you're not what she made you look like, but I was scared. I'm always scared around them. You don't need to apologize for your parents, Sophie. Yes, I do, because they won't. She looked up at me, and I saw something fierce burning behind the fear in her eyes. I'm not stupid, Grandma. I know what they are. I've known for a long time. I leaned forward. What do you mean? I've been watching them for over a year now, listening when they think I'm not paying attention, looking at things they leave lying around. Sophie reached into her backpack and pulled out a small USB drive, holding it out to me like an offering. I started saving everything I found. Screenshots, photos of documents, recordings. I took the drive, turning it over in my fingers. Such a small thing to contain so much potential destruction. What's on here? Emails between Mom and some lawyer. They've been discussing options for putting you in a nursing home. She calls it elderly care placement, but I read what they wrote. Grandma, she's trying to figure out how to get control of your money by claiming you have dementia or something. Sophie's voice cracked. You don't have dementia. You're the sharpest person I know. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though Patricia had already warned me this might be coming. Hearing it from my granddaughter, seeing the evidence she had risked so much to gather, made it real in a way I couldn't deny. "There's more," Sophie continued. "Text messages between Mom and Dad. She talks about him like he's useless," she said. Sophie paused, swallowing hard. "She said she only needs him until they secure the old woman's assets. That's you, Grandma. She's been planning this for years." I set the USB drive on the table between us, my mind racing through the implications of everything she was telling me. "Sophie, why didn't you come to me sooner?" "Because I was afraid you wouldn't believe me." "Because I was afraid of what she would do if she found out." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and suddenly she wasn't a brave young woman gathering evidence against her own mother. She was just a child, overwhelmed by a truth too heavy for anyone her age to carry alone. And because I found something else, something that made me realize this isn't just about money. She reached into her backpack again and pulled out a photograph, its edges worn from handling. She handed it to me, and I found myself looking at a man I didn't recognize. Elderly, white-haired, smiling at the camera with a birthday cake in front of him. The date stamped in the corner read June 2010. "That's Jonathan Ashford," Sophie said. "Dad's father, my other grandfather." She met my eyes. "Dad told me he died before I was born." "But that photo is from 2010, Grandma. I was already 2 years old." "He lied about him being dead." I stared at the photograph, remembering what Patricia had told me just yesterday. Jonathan Ashford, alive in a Connecticut nursing home, abandoned by his son 16 years ago. Sophie had discovered the same truth through her own investigation, and the horror of it was written across her face. "I think Dad did something to him," Sophie whispered. "I think he got rid of him so he could take everything he had. And now," her voice broke completely, "and now they're going to do the same thing to you." I reached across and took her hand, squeezing gently. "I won't let that happen, sweetheart." Sophie wiped her tears with her free hand, then looked at me with an expression that was equal parts hope and terror. "There's more on that drive, Grandma. Audio recordings I made when Mom was on the phone. In one of them, she says something that made me feel sick. She hesitated, as if speaking the words aloud would make them more real. She says, 'I handled his father. I can handle hers.' I think she's planning something terrible, and I think it's going to happen soon." I called Patricia before Sophie had even left my apartment. Within 3 hours, we were sitting together in her office. The USB drive connected to her secure computer, its contents spreading across the screen like evidence at a crime scene. Sophie had been thorough. Emails, screenshots, financial documents, and 4 audio files that would change everything I thought I knew about my daughter and the man she had married. Patricia played the first recording. Vivian's voice filled the room, casual and confident, speaking to someone whose responses we couldn't hear. "You have to understand how these things work. I learned from Marcus. Difficult elderly relatives require a specific approach. You can't give them time to think or plan or talk to lawyers. You move quickly, get the diagnosis on paper, and then everything else falls into place." There was a pause, then laughter, cold and sharp like breaking glass. Marcus's father didn't even fight back. Signed everything Marcus put in front of him once the dementia diagnosis was official. The doctors were very cooperative once they understood the situation. And now he's comfortable in his little room in Connecticut, and Marcus never has to think about him again. It's really quite simple once you know the system. Patricia stopped the recording. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. I'd had suspected Vivienne was capable of cruelty, but hearing her describe what Marcus had done to his own father with such casual satisfaction made my stomach turn. This wasn't a woman who had made difficult decisions under pressure. This was a predator who had found a system to exploit and learned to perfect it. Patricia said quietly, "Jonathan Ashford was diagnosed with early-stage cognitive decline in February of 2009. The diagnosis came from a doctor, William Chen, a geriatric specialist in Hartford. Within 4 months, Marcus had obtained full power of attorney. Within 7 months, Jonathan was placed in Meadowbrook Nursing Facility, and his assets, the house, the investments, everything, had been liquidated. End quote. She pulled up another document on her screen, and the doctor retired that same year. Moved to Florida. I found something interesting in his financial records. Shortly before his retirement, Dr. Chen received a substantial gift from an anonymous donor, $75,000, routed through a charitable foundation that no longer exists. She looked at me. I can't prove Marcus paid him to exaggerate or fabricate the diagnosis, but the timing is suspicious. And the pattern matches what Sophie found in those recordings. I sat back in my chair, letting the full weight of the revelation settle over me. For years, I had watched Vivian drift away from our family, had felt the slow erosion of our relationship without understanding its cause. I had blamed Marcus for being a bad influence, blamed myself for not being interesting enough to hold her attention, blamed the natural drift of generations for the growing silence between us. But it was none of those things. It was deliberate, calculated, patient. Marcus had isolated his own father the same way he was now isolating me from Vivian. And she had learned from him, absorbed his methods, become his accomplice in a scheme that was now targeting me. She's following his playbook, I said slowly, each word heavy with understanding. Isolation first, then the diagnosis, then control. Patricia nodded. Catherine, we need to act. If she's already consulting lawyers about elderly care placement for you, she's further along than we realized. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. 40 years of memories lived in these streets. The small shop where Thomas and I bought our first couch, the park where we took Vivian when she was little, the bridge Thomas had designed that still carried thousands of cars every day. I had spent my life creating things that would last, building connections, mending what was broken. I would not let Vivian and Marcus tear down everything I had left. Thomas knew, I said quietly. He tried to warn me for years, but I didn't want to believe our daughter had married a monster. I kept making excuses, kept hoping things would get better. I turned back to Patricia. Before he died, Thomas made me promise that if things got bad, I would protect myself. I think it's time I kept that promise. I had not opened the drawer in my desk at home for 3 years. I had not been ready to face what Thomas had left behind. But that evening, alone in my apartment, I finally pulled out the large envelope that had been waiting for me since his death. His handwriting on the front was still as familiar as my own heartbeat. For Catherine, when you're ready to fight back. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope and pulled out a letter, its pages covered in Thomas's careful script. I read the first line, and suddenly he was with me again, his voice in my ear, his love reaching across the divide of death to protect me one last time. My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, then I was right about Vivian and Marcus, and I'm so sorry I couldn't be there to fight beside you. I read Thomas's letter 4 times that night, and each time the words blurred through fresh tears. He had written it during his final months, when I thought he was resting or sleeping or simply fading away. I thought I had been protecting him from stress. I never imagined he had been protecting me. My dearest Catherine, he wrote, if you're reading this, then I was right about Vivian and Marcus, and I'm so sorry I couldn't be there to fight beside you. I've watched them for years now, watched them slowly build walls between you and our daughter, watched them isolate her from everyone who loved her before Marcus came along. I recognized the pattern because I researched it. There's a term psychologists use, coercive control. It's what abusers do to their victims. They don't use fists. They use distance, dependency, and doubt. Marcus has been doing this to Vivian since the day they married, and through her. He's been doing it to you. Thomas described moments I had overlooked or explained away. The way Marcus would schedule conflicts whenever I planned to visit. The subtle comments that made Vivian feel guilty for spending time with her mother. the financial entanglements that kept her dependent on his approval for every decision. I couldn't prove anything while I was alive. Thomas continued. Marcus is too careful, too patient. But I've left you tools, my love. Use them when you need them, and when the time comes, don't hesitate. Don't let kindness be your weakness. Fight for yourself the way you always fought for me and Vivienne. The letter ended with instructions to visit Eleanor Price, Thomas's closest friend for over 45 years. Eleanor knows everything. I trusted her with my fears when I couldn't burden you with them. Go to her when you're ready. She's been waiting. I drove to Eleanor's house the next morning, a modest Victorian in the suburbs where she and her late husband had raised their 3 children. Eleanor was 73 years old, her silver hair pulled back in a simple braid, her eyes sharp and knowing as she opened the door and saw me standing there. You've read the letter, she said. It wasn't a question. How long have you known? Since before Thomas died. Eleanor stepped aside to let me in. He made me promise not to say anything until you came to me asking for help. He knew you would need time. He knew you would need to see the truth for yourself before you could accept it. We sat in her living room, surrounded by photographs of grandchildren and memories of lives well lived. Eleanor reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope I recognized, my name on the front in Thomas's handwriting. He gave me this 3 years ago, Eleanor explained. Sealed instructions. I was only supposed to open it if you came to me asking questions about Vivienne and Marcus. She handed me the envelope. Inside, I found a key and a handwritten note listing Patricia Hammond's private phone number. Thomas hired Patricia himself, Eleanor said. Paid a retainer from a separate account you didn't know about. He wanted a lawyer watching over you after he was gone, someone who would notice if things started going wrong. I stared at the key in my hand. What is this for? A safety deposit box at First National Bank. Thomas set it up during his last year. Everything you need is inside. Financial documents, legal papers, evidence he gathered about Marcus's past. Eleanor's voice softened. He spent his final weeks preparing for this, Catherine. Hours on the phone with lawyers and accountants and investigators while you thought he was resting. He knew he was dying, but he refused to leave you unprotected. The tears came again, and I didn't try to stop them. All those months, when I thought I was caring for my dying husband, he had been caring for me. Building walls I couldn't see, laying traps I didn't know existed, loving me in ways that would outlast his own breath. He said something to me near the end, Eleanor continued quietly. He said, Marcus will wait until I'm gone, then he'll strike. Catherine is too kind to see it coming, so I'll see it for her. That's what he did, Catherine. He saw everything coming, and he prepared for it. He made it during his final weeks, when he still had the strength to sit up and speak clearly. Often, in his final weeks, you didn't have the strength to sit up and speak clearly. He made me promise not to tell you about this unless Marcus and Vivienne made their move. He wanted you to hear his voice when you needed strength most. I took the flash drive, feeling its weight like a sacred relic. Have you watched it? Strong paragraphs. No, Thomas said it was only for you. Eleanor squeezed my hand. But he also said something else. He said save it for the moment when everyone needs to see who Marcus really is. I think he meant for you to use it publicly, Catherine, when the time is right. The key Eleanor had given me opened a safety deposit box at First National Bank. A small steel container that held the final pieces of Thomas's carefully constructed puzzle. Patricia accompanied me to the bank the following morning, her presence both professional and personal. She had known about this box for years, had helped Thomas fill it with documents I was only now ready to see. As the bank officer led us to the vault and left us alone with the box, I felt Thomas's presence as strongly as if he were standing beside me. Inside, I found a thick folder of documents that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. The first was a certificate of ownership for a limited liability company called Heritage Investments, LLC. According to the paperwork, I held an 18% stake in the Belmont Grand Hotel chain, the same chain that operated the hotel where Vivian had thrown money at my feet. I stared at the numbers, memories flooding back. 23 years ago, a young developer named Richard Wells had approached Thomas about investing in his vision for a boutique hotel concept. We had believed in his idea and written a check for $35,000, money we could barely afford at the time. Money that meant delaying our own home repairs and Vivian's summer camp. But Thomas had seen potential, and I had trusted his judgment. That investment had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. "You never told Vivian about this?" Patricia asked, watching my face as I processed the information. "We never told anyone. It was a private investment, something Thomas and I decided to keep separate from our regular finances. We reinvested the dividends for years, never touched the principal." I shook my head slowly. I honestly forgot how much it had grown. After Thomas died, I just stopped paying attention to it. The next documents were property deeds for 3 rental properties in the suburbs. Small apartment buildings Thomas and I had purchased decades ago as retirement security. They generated steady passive income that flowed into accounts Vivian knew nothing about. And beneath those deeds was a detailed financial portfolio summary showing assets totaling just over $1.8 million. I sat back, overwhelmed. We had always lived modestly, saving carefully. But this, Thomas had been protecting far more than I realized. He restructured everything 2 years before he died, Patricia explained. He contacted me and several other estate attorneys. He was worried about what might happen to you after he was gone, and he wanted to create what he called an asset protection fortress. Patricia pulled out another document, a thick legal filing with multiple signatures. All of your major assets were moved into irrevocable trusts. The structures are designed so that you have full access to everything during your lifetime. But upon your death, the assets pass directly to the Sophie Catherine Trust. Sophie, I whispered, my granddaughter's name combined with my own. Thomas named the trust himself. He wanted Sophie protected, but he also wanted to ensure that you were protected first. Patricia pointed to a specific clause in the document. Read this carefully, Catherine. It's the key to everything. I read the words aloud. Any family member who demonstrates financial exploitation, abuse, or mistreatment of Catherine Morrison shall be permanently excluded from any inheritance or beneficial interest in the trust assets. The implications hit me like a wave. Vivian's unauthorized withdrawals from my account. Marcus's plans for nursing home placement and conservatorship. The public humiliation at the hotel. Every action they had taken over the past year had been documented, witnessed, recorded. They had already disqualified themselves from inheriting anything, and they didn't even know it. Thomas anticipated all of this, Patricia said quietly. He couldn't prove what Marcus was planning while he was alive, but he built a legal structure that would expose and punish it after the fact. The Ashfords think they're waiting for a frail old woman to die so they can inherit her modest pension and savings. They have no idea that your true wealth is substantial, that they've already violated the terms that would have allowed them to benefit from it, and that Thomas built walls they cannot penetrate. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I had been holding for what felt like years. All this time, I had felt powerless. All this time, I had believed I was alone against forces I couldn't fight. But Thomas had been fighting for me from beyond the grave, using the only weapons available to the dying: foresight, planning, and an unshakable love that refused to let death be the end of his protection. Thomas, you brilliant man, I murmured. You were always 3 steps ahead of everyone. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Patricia began gathering the documents to take back to her office for safekeeping when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered. I watched her expression shift from curiosity to surprise, to something I couldn't quite read. I understand, she said finally. I'll let her know. She ended the call and turned to me with a strange look in her eyes. That was Daniel Cross, the general manager from the Belmont Grand. He wants to meet with you privately. He says he has information about the Ashfords that we need to hear, information he's been gathering for some time. Patricia paused, her brow furrowed. And Catherine? He said something else. He said his mother's name was Margaret Cross. She watched my face carefully. Does that mean anything to you? Margaret Cross. The name echoed through decades of memory, pulling me back to a time I had nearly forgotten. A neighbor, a friend, a woman whose family had faced ruin until someone quietly intervened. Yes, I said slowly. It means everything. Daniel Cross was already waiting when I arrived at a small cafe 3 blocks from my apartment. He had chosen a corner booth away from the windows, private enough for the conversation we needed to have. I studied him as I approached. Early 40s, composed, professional, but with something in his eyes that spoke of deeper currents beneath the surface. He stood as I reached the table and extended his hand with a respect that felt almost reverential. Mrs. Morrison, thank you for meeting me. You said your mother was Margaret Cross. I sat across from him, searching his face for traces of the woman I had known decades ago. I haven't heard that name in 30 years. Daniel nodded slowly. My mother spoke of you often. She said you were the most compassionate person she ever knew. He paused, gathering his thoughts. 30 years ago, my mother's family was facing disaster. My father had died suddenly, a heart attack at 42. Mom was left with 2 young children, a mortgage she couldn't afford, and medical bills from Dad's final hospitalization that were going to force us into bankruptcy. We were going to lose our house, everything my parents had built. I remembered Margaret. She had lived 2 streets over from us, a kind woman who had brought soup when Thomas was recovering from his accident, who had babysat Vivian when I needed to work extra hours. When her husband died, I had seen the devastation in her eyes, the terror of a woman watching her family's future crumble. She never asked you for anything, Daniel continued. She was too proud, but you showed up one day with a check for $20,000. You told her it was a gift, not a loan, that you believed in her future, and that the only condition was that she use it to keep her family together and never tell anyone where the money came from. His voice thickened with emotion. That money saved us, Mrs. Morrison. My mother kept our house. She put me and my sister through college. She rebuilt her life and died 5 years ago, surrounded by her family, at peace. And before she died, she made me promise one thing. What was that? She said if Catherine Morrison ever needs help, you help her. That woman saved our family when no one else would. You owe her a debt that can never be fully repaid. Daniel met my eyes. When I became general manager of the Belmont Grand 3 years ago and discovered you were a silent partner, I knew it was my chance to honor that promise. I've been watching over you ever since. When I noticed your daughter's behavior, I started documenting everything. I've been reporting my concerns to Attorney Hammond for the past 10 months. So that was how Patricia had known about the account irregularities before I did. Daniel had been her eyes and ears, a guardian angel I never knew existed, repaying a kindness I'd nearly forgotten. There's more, Daniel continued, pulling out his phone. I've been monitoring Mrs. Ashford's activities since the hotel incident. She's been making calls to nursing homes, specifically memory care facilities in Connecticut. She's been asking about placement procedures for an elderly relative with early-stage dementia. He swiped to a recording app. I managed to capture one of her phone conversations. I think you need to hear it. He pressed play. Vivian's voice filled the space between us, confident and calculating. The old woman's mind is going. Anyone can see it. We just need the proper documentation and diagnosis from a cooperative physician, and we can get control of everything. Once we have conservatorship, she won't be able to make decisions for herself anymore. It's really quite straightforward when you know the process. Marcus's father was more difficult because he was actually healthy, but this situation is much easier. Daniel stopped the recording. My hands had clenched into fists beneath the table, but I kept my face neutral. I had suspected this was coming, but hearing Vivienne speak so casually about stealing my autonomy, my dignity, my very identity, it took every ounce of self-control not to let the rage consume me. She's also consulted with a lawyer about conservatorship proceedings, Daniel added. I have the attorney's name if you need it. And Mrs. Morrison. He hesitated. There's one more thing. The reason I wanted to meet with you in person. He pulled out a small envelope and slid it across the table. Your late husband contacted me 2 weeks before he died. I didn't know him personally, but he somehow found out about my connection to you, about what you did for my family. He asked me to give you this if certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was that your daughter took action against you. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten note in Thomas's familiar script. Catherine, by the time you read this, you'll know what Vivienne and Marcus are capable of. The next part will be hardest. You'll have to give them enough rope to hang themselves. Be strong, my love. You can do this. Remember what I taught you about engineering. The strongest structures are the ones that can withstand pressure from all sides. You are the strongest structure I ever designed. You're Thomas. Tears blurred my vision. Even in death, Thomas was guiding me, preparing me, loving me. That evening, they came. Vivienne and Marcus arrived at my apartment unannounced, all smiles and false warmth. Vivienne swept in wearing an expensive silk blouse and designer jeans, her perfume filling my small living room. She kissed my cheek as if she hadn't thrown money at my feet 2 weeks ago, as if she hadn't screamed at me to leave a hotel I partly owned. Mom, we've been so worried about you, she cooed, settling onto my couch like she owned the place. Living alone at your age, managing bills and appointments, it must be overwhelming. I played my part. I let my hands tremble slightly when I poured tea. I repeated a question I had already asked. I let confusion cloud my expression, fumbled with the remote control for the television. Worried about what? I asked, my voice wavering just enough. Marcus stood near the door, his eyes fixed on a spot over my shoulder. He wouldn't look at me directly. Whatever remained of the man who had called me mom at his wedding, it wasn't strong enough to meet his mother-in-law's gaze. Vivienne produced a document from her leather handbag. We've prepared something to help you, Mom. Just a simple financial power of attorney. It would let us assist with your bills, your accounts, the little details that become so difficult as we get older. She placed it on my coffee table with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It's for your own protection. I picked up the document with shaking hands. An act, though Vivienne didn't know it. I squinted at the pages, turned them slowly, let my brow furrow in manufactured confusion. I don't understand these legal things. I mumbled. This is so complicated. Let me think about it. Come back next week. Right? Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need. She left the document on my table, as if by accident. We'll come back on Thursday to answer any questions. After they left, I examined every page with clear eyes and steady hands. The fine print was buried on page 9, nestled between paragraphs of legal jargon designed to obscure its meaning. Authorization for full asset management and liquidation authority. The power to sell my property, empty my accounts, transfer my assets, all without my knowledge or consent. This wasn't about helping with bills. This was about taking everything I had. I photographed every page and sent them to Patricia with a single message. They've made their move. Now we make ours. Patricia called an emergency meeting the next morning. We gathered in her office. Daniel, Patricia, and myself. 3 people united by circumstance and a shared determination to see justice done. The power of attorney document I had photographed lay spread across the conference table, its predatory clauses highlighted in yellow marker. "This document is a masterpiece of deception," Patricia said, tapping the highlighted sections. "On the surface, it reads like standard financial assistance authorization, but buried in the fine print are provisions that would give Vivian and Marcus complete control over every aspect of your financial life. They can sell your property, liquidate your investments, transfer funds, all without your consent or even your knowledge." Daniel leaned forward. "What are our options?" Patricia gestured to a stack of folders on her desk. "I've prepared multiple legal responses. A restraining order, preventing them from accessing any of Catherine's accounts. Civil fraud charges based on the unauthorized withdrawals Vivian has already made. A formal complaint to the state bar about the attorney who helped draft this power of attorney. There are clear ethical violations in how it was presented." She paused. "We have enough evidence right now to destroy them legally. The question is whether Catherine wants to proceed." I sat in silence for a long moment, considering the path before me. Legal victory would be satisfying. Restraining orders and fraud charges would stop their plans, and perhaps even land them in prison. But it wouldn't expose the truth. It wouldn't force Vivian to see what her marriage had turned her into. It wouldn't give my daughter the chance to choose her own soul over Marcus's manipulation. "I want more than legal victory," I said finally. "I want them to expose themselves completely. I want Vivian to see with her own eyes, in a moment she cannot deny or explain away, exactly what she's become." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" "They think I'm a confused old woman, sitting on a modest pension. They think they're close to getting everything. What if I let them believe they've won?" Daniel understood immediately. "You want to give them what they think they want." "I want to show them a fake will, a document that appears to leave everything to Vivian. My savings, my personal property, the small amount they believe I have. No mention of the hotel shares, the rental properties, the trusts Thomas created. Just a simple will that makes Vivian my sole heir." I met Patricia's eyes. "If I present this as a peace offering, as an attempt to reconcile before I die, Vivian won't be able to resist. She'll push Marcus to accept it immediately, before I change my mind." "And the trap?" Patricia asked. "Sophie," I said, "the will I show them will leave nothing to my granddaughter. Not a college fund, not a keepsake, nothing. Any parent who truly loved their child would refuse to accept a will that disinherits her completely. But if they sign off on it enthusiastically, if they celebrate cutting their own daughter out of her grandmother's estate—" I let the implication hang in the air. Patricia nodded slowly. "It proves they care only about the money. It's documented evidence of their priorities." She was already reaching for a legal pad. "I can draft something convincing. We'll mark it clearly as draft for discussion to avoid any legal complications. It will suggest you're leaving your entire estate to Vivienne, while making no mention of assets they don't know about." "They'll see what they want to see," Daniel added. "Greed blinds people to everything, except the prize in front of them." We spent the next 3 hours crafting the document. Patricia was meticulous, creating a will that appeared legitimate while remaining legally meaningless. The language was vague enough to be interpreted broadly, savings and personal property, while omitting any reference to the trusts, the hotel shares, or the rental properties that constituted the vast majority of my actual wealth. When she finished, I held a document that looked like the key to a modest inheritance, but was actually worthless paper. That afternoon, I brought Sophie into the plan. She arrived at my apartment, still shaken by everything she had learned over the past 2 weeks. When I explained what I intended to do, her face fell. "You're pretending to cut me out, Grandma?" "Listen to me, sweetheart." I took her hands in mine. "Your grandfather made sure you're protected no matter what happens. The real will, the trusts, everything goes to you. This fake document is just a test for your parents. If they truly love you, they'll refuse to sign a will that gives them everything and leaves you with nothing. They'll insist that you be included, that your future be protected. Sophie's expression shifted from hurt to understanding, and then to something harder. And if they don't refuse, if they're happy to take everything and leave me nothing, then we'll know exactly who they are, and so will everyone else. She was quiet for a long moment, processing the weight of what I was asking her to witness. Her own parents failing a test of basic decency. Her own mother choosing greed over her daughter's welfare. "I'll play along," she said finally. "I'll act upset when I find out about the will. I'll make them think I'm on their side, angry at you for cutting me out. That way they'll let their guard down completely." I pulled her into an embrace, proud of her courage and heartbroken that she needed it. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you." That evening, I sent a text to Vivian. My fingers were steady as I typed the words that would set everything in motion. "Vivian, I've been thinking about what you said. Maybe we should talk about the future. I'm working on my will, and I'd like the family's input. Dinner at Roselli's this Saturday. All of us. It's time to settle things." I watched the screen, waiting. Minutes passed. Then, for the first time in months, my phone displayed a response from my daughter. "We'll be there, Mom." Roselli's was the kind of restaurant where old money came to be seen and new money came to pretend. Soft lighting, white tablecloths, the gentle clink of expensive crystal. I had chosen this venue deliberately. It was elegant enough to make Vivian comfortable, public enough to ensure witnesses, and familiar enough to the staff that Daniel's contact, a waiter named Antonio, who owed Daniel several favors, could work our table without raising suspicion. I arrived early, dressed in a slightly dated dress I had worn to Thomas's funeral 3 years ago. The effect was intentional. A widow who hadn't updated her wardrobe. A woman clinging to the past. Someone whose best days were clearly behind her. I asked the hostess the same question twice about our reservation, letting confusion cloud my face until she guided me to the table with the gentle patience people reserve for the elderly and infirm. Vivian and Marcus arrived precisely on time. She was stunning in a navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless, her smile radiating a warmth that didn't reach her calculating eyes. Marcus wore a tailored suit and the expression of a man who desperately wanted to be anywhere else. They kissed my cheeks with mechanical affection, then took their seats across from me. Their chairs positioned slightly closer to each other than to me. Sophie came last, playing her role with a skill that broke my heart. She slumped into her chair without greeting anyone, her face set in the sullen mask of a teenager who had been dragged somewhere against her will. When Vivian asked how school was going, Sophie shrugged and muttered something about it being fine. The tension between them was convincing because it was real. Sophie had spent 14 years watching her mother manipulate everyone around her, and the resentment didn't need to be manufactured. Dinner proceeded with excruciating politeness. Vivian dominated the conversation, talking about her latest business ventures, their recent vacation to the Amalfi Coast, the renovations they were planning for their beach house. I nodded along, occasionally asking her to repeat something, letting my attention wander visibly before snapping back with apologies. Each small performance of confusion made Vivian's smile grow wider. She thought she was watching her prey weaken. She had no idea she was the one being hunted. Antonio served us efficiently, his movements positioning him perfectly to capture our conversation on the small recording device concealed in his vest pocket. Daniel had assured me the audio quality would be excellent. Every word spoken at this table would be preserved for whatever came next. When dessert arrived, tiramisu for the table, though I barely touched mine, I reached into my handbag and produced the document Patricia had prepared. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it, a performance so convincing that even I almost believed I was nervous. "I've been getting my affairs in order," I said, smoothing the pages on the table. "At my age, a woman has to think about these things. I wanted your input before I finalize anything. Vivian's eyes locked onto the document like a hawk spotting wounded prey. Of course, Mom, we're happy to help. I slid the papers toward her. This is a draft of my will. I've left everything to you, sweetheart. My savings, my personal property, whatever I have when the time comes. Marcus is listed as secondary beneficiary in case anything happens to you. I paused, watching their faces. Sophie is mentioned for some sentimental items, your grandmother's jewelry, some photo albums, things like that. But the financial assets go to you. Vivian scanned the document, and I watched relief wash over her features like water over stone. She had been expecting a confrontation, accusations, anger. Instead, her mother was handing her an inheritance. Marcus leaned over her shoulder, reading quickly, and the smile that spread across his face was genuine for the first time all evening. They could barely contain their satisfaction. "Mom, this is very wise," Vivian said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Sophie is so young. She doesn't need the burden of managing finances at her age. We'll take care of her. Of course. You don't need to worry about that." Neither of them questioned why their own daughter was being left with nothing of material value. Neither suggested that perhaps Sophie deserved a college fund, a small inheritance, some acknowledgement that she was part of this family too. They simply accepted a document that enriched themselves and abandoned their child without a moment's hesitation. I pressed further, needing to be certain. What about Sophie's college fund? Should I set something aside specifically for her education? Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "We'll handle Sophie's future, Catherine. You don't need to complicate things. The fewer complications in these documents, the better for everyone when the time comes. When the time comes." He said it so casually, as if my death were simply an item on his calendar, an appointment he was eager to keep. Across the table, Sophie gripped her napkin so tightly her knuckles turned white, but she kept her face neutral, her eyes fixed on her untouched dessert. She was hearing her own parents dismiss her future without a second thought, and she was staying silent because she understood what was at stake. My brave, brilliant granddaughter was watching her family fail a test they didn't know they were taking. After dinner, as we gathered our coats in the restaurant's foyer, I pulled Vivian aside. Marcus was distracted by his phone, already texting someone, probably their lawyer, already planning how to accelerate everything now that the will was in sight. "Vivian," I said quietly, "I want to do something special, a family gathering next Sunday. Everyone together. I've invited some old friends who want to see us, people who knew your father, people who care about this family." Vivian nodded eagerly, still glowing from the promise of inheritance. "That sounds wonderful, Mom. We'll be there." "Good." I held her gaze, and for just a moment I let the mask slip. My eyes turned cold, and my voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "There are some things that need to be said, Vivian. Some people who deserve to hear the truth." She didn't notice the change. She was too busy dreaming of money that would never be hers. The week that followed was a masterclass in predatory patience. Vivian called me every day, sometimes twice, her voice sweet with concern that curdled in my ears. She asked how I was sleeping, whether I was eating properly, if I had remembered to take medications I didn't actually need. Each question was designed to establish a pattern. The dutiful daughter checking on her declining mother, building a case file of confusion and frailty that could later be presented to doctors and judges. On Wednesday, she escalated. "Mom, I've been thinking about your safety," she said, her tone dripping with manufactured worry. "Living alone at your age, in that apartment with those stairs, it's really not practical anymore. We've been looking into some options for you. There's a lovely assisted living facility in Connecticut. Beautiful grounds, excellent medical staff, and it's so peaceful there. You could relax and let professionals take care of you." Connecticut, the same state where Jonathan Ashford had spent 16 years in isolation. abandoned by the son who had stolen everything he owned. Vivienne and Marcus weren't even creative enough to choose a different location for their second victim. Parentheses. I played along, letting my voice waver with uncertainty. Connecticut? That's so far away. I don't know anyone there. Frank. That's the point, Mom. A fresh start. No stress. No responsibilities. You've earned some rest. She paused, and I could hear the calculation in her silence. Have you had a chance to sign those papers we left with you? The power of attorney? It would make the transition so much easier if we could handle the details for you. I told her I was still thinking about it, still confused by all the legal language. She sighed with poorly concealed frustration and promised to send Marcus over to help me understand. But Sophie was already one step ahead. That same evening, she arrived at my apartment with a new recording on her phone, captured just hours earlier. Her hands shook as she played it for me. Vivian's voice filled the room, sharp and commanding. Once she signs the power of attorney, we control everything. Then we get the doctors to certify early dementia. I know someone who helped Marcus before, and we can move her whenever we want. She'll be grateful eventually. They always are, once they realize they don't have to make decisions anymore. Marcus's reply was weak, uncertain. Vivian, she's your mother. My mother is a stubborn old woman, sitting on money we desperately need. Her voice turned ice cold. Do you want to save yourself or not? We're drowning in debt, Marcus. Your gambling, my failed investments, the lifestyle we've built, it all collapses without that inheritance. So stop being sentimental and start being practical. The recording ended. Sophie looked at me with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm sorry you had to hear that. I pulled her into an embrace. You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. You're the bravest person in this family. The final preparations came together like pieces of a puzzle Thomas had designed years ago. Patricia confirmed the guest list for Sunday. Daniel would attend as a family friend, his presence unremarkable to anyone who didn't know his true role. Eleanor would bring Thomas's video, the message from beyond that my husband had recorded for exactly this moment. A court reporter named Gloria, a trusted colleague of Patricia's, would be present to document everything that transpired, creating a legal record that could withstand any future challenge. And then there was the final guest. Daniel had spent the week tracking him down, cutting through bureaucratic obstacles and medical privacy barriers with a determination born of personal debt. Jonathan Ashford, 76 years old, resident of Meadowbrook Nursing Facility for 16 years. Marcus's father, the man Marcus and Vivian had told everyone was dead. I spoke with Jonathan on the phone Friday evening. His voice was thin but clear, his mind sharp despite everything his son had done to convince the world otherwise. He told people I died? Jonathan asked, and I heard the tremor of old pain beneath his words. Yes, he told Vivienne, he told Sophie, everyone who might have asked questions. A long silence, then, I'll come, I'll tell them everything. He took my home, my savings, my dignity. He put me in that place and never looked back. His voice hardened. It's time he answered for it. Sunday morning arrived cold and overcast, winter clouds pressing low against the city. I dressed in my best outfit, a burgundy dress I had sewn myself years ago, tailored perfectly to my frame. I spent a long moment adjusting my pearl necklace, the one Thomas had given me on our 20th anniversary. The woman looking back at me from the mirror was 70 years old, weathered by loss and betrayal, but her eyes were clear and determined. Today was not about revenge. Today was about truth. I placed Thomas's photograph on the mantel, positioning it so he could see the entire room. Watch over us today, my love, I whispered. Give me the strength to do what needs to be done. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Daniel's car pulling up, followed by Patricia's sedan. Behind them, a medical transport van. Jonathan Ashford, arriving with his nurse. The pieces were falling into place. In 1 hour, Vivienne and Marcus would walk through my door, expecting a simple family gathering, a chance to push me closer to signing away my autonomy. They had no idea that their past, present, and future were about to collide in this small apartment, witnessed by everyone they had ever betrayed. The guests arrived in careful sequence, each entrance choreographed to build toward the moment of revelation. Daniel came first, positioning himself near the door with the quiet alertness of a man prepared for anything. Eleanor followed, carrying a small bag that contained Thomas's final message. Patricia and Gloria, her court reporter colleague, arranged themselves near the window, legal pads ready. Jonathan Ashford remained in the spare bedroom with his nurse, waiting for his cue. Vivienne and Marcus arrived at 11 sharp. She swept into my apartment wearing a cream-colored dress and a smile designed to project warmth she didn't feel. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the unfamiliar faces with momentary confusion before dismissing them as elderly friends of no consequence. "Mom, what a lovely gathering," she said, kissing my cheek with practiced affection. "I didn't realize you were inviting so many people." "Old friends," I replied. "People who knew your father. People who care about this family." Marcus shook hands with Daniel without recognition, then settled onto the couch beside his wife. Sophie sat apart from them, her face carefully neutral, her hands folded in her lap. The atmosphere was tense beneath its veneer of politeness, like the pressure before a storm breaks. We made small talk for 10 minutes. Vivienne complimented my apartment, asked about my health, mentioned again how wonderful that Connecticut facility sounded. I nodded and smiled and let her believe everything was proceeding according to her plan. Then the doorbell rang. I rose slowly, steadying myself on the arm of my chair, a performance of frailty I no longer needed to maintain. "That must be our last guest," I said. "Someone very special." I opened the door to reveal a frail, elderly man in a wheelchair, a nurse standing behind him. Jonathan Ashford was thinner than the photographs Sophie had found, his white hair wispy, his hands spotted with age, but his eyes were sharp and clear as they fixed on the man sitting across my living room, the son who had abandoned him 16 years ago. Marcus's face drained of color, his mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The confident predator who had spent weeks planning my destruction sat frozen, his carefully constructed lies crumbling around him. Jonathan wheeled himself into the room, his nurse guiding him to a position where everyone could see him clearly. He looked at Marcus with an expression that held no warmth, no forgiveness, only the cold clarity of a man who had spent 16 years waiting for this reckoning. "Hello, son," he said. "I'm not dead after all." Surprised? If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The silence that followed was absolute. Vivienne stared at her father-in-law with dawning horror. Sophie leaned forward, her eyes wide. Daniel and Patricia watched with the focused attention of witnesses who understood the significance of every word about to be spoken. Jonathan began to speak, and his voice carried the weight of years of isolation and betrayal. "After my wife died, my son came to me with paperwork. He said it would protect my assets, make things easier if anything happened to me. I trusted him. He was my child." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Within 8 months, he had sold my house, my car, everything I owned. He told my neighbors I had severe dementia and couldn't care for myself. I didn't. My mind was fine. He put me in a nursing home 400 miles from anyone who knew me and told the facility I had no other family." His eyes found Sophie, and tears began to slide down his weathered cheeks. "He told me my granddaughter would be better off not knowing me. He said Sophie would only be confused by having a grandfather with memory problems." He reached out a trembling hand toward the girl who had thought he was dead. "You must be Sophie. You look just like your grandmother." Sophie was across the room before anyone could react, dropping to her knees beside his wheelchair and wrapping her arms around him. "I thought you died before I was born," she sobbed. "They told me you were gone. I never knew." Strong P. Jonathan held his granddaughter, this child he had been denied for 14 years, and looked at Marcus with something beyond anger. "You took everything from me. My home, my dignity, my family. You erased me from existence so you could steal what little I had, and you never even looked back." Strong, I stood and faced Vivian directly. Her composure had shattered completely. She sat rigid on my couch, her face a mask of shock and fury, her hands gripping the cushions as if they were the only things keeping her from flying apart. Strong P. He did it to his own father," I said, my voice steady and clear. "And you were planning to do the same to me. We have the recordings, your phone calls, your conversations with Marcus about dementia doctors and nursing homes. We have the documents, the power of attorney designed to steal my autonomy. We have the witnesses." I gestured to the room. "Everyone here knows exactly what you are." Vivienne finally found her voice. "This is insane. You're all insane. Jonathan was sick. He needed care. I wasn't part of whatever Marcus did back then." "You weren't sick." Jonathan's voice cut through her protest like a blade. "I was trusting. There's a difference." I raised my hand, silencing her before she could continue her lies. "Before we discuss consequences, there's someone else who deserves to speak." I nodded to Eleanor, who connected the flash drive to my television with trembling hands. "Your father recorded this message before he died. He wanted you to hear it when the truth finally came out." The screen flickered to life, and then Thomas appeared. Thomas as he was in his final weeks, thin and tired, but radiating a determination that death itself couldn't extinguish. Vivian made a strangled sound, but no one moved to comfort her. "If you're watching this," Thomas began, his voice clear despite his illness, "then Marcus and Vivian have finally shown who they really are. I'm recording this because I knew this day would come. I watched you for years, Vivian. I watched Marcus isolate you from your mother, from me, from everyone who loved you before he came along. I documented every manipulation, every lie, every calculated cruelty." He paused, and even on the screen I could see the steel in his eyes. "But what destroyed any hope I had for you was what I discovered about Jonathan. Yes, Vivian, I found him. I've been paying for his upgraded care anonymously for years. Better food, better medical attention, small comforts that his own son denied him. Because someone had to protect him from Marcus, just as I'm now protecting your mother from you both." Thomas leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "And now Catherine will reveal what you never knew existed. What I built to ensure you could never destroy her the way Marcus destroyed his father." The screen went dark. Thomas's face disappeared, but his presence lingered in the room like a protective force that death could not diminish. I looked at Vivienne and Marcus, these two people who had spent years dismantling my family, who had schemed to take everything I had, and I felt nothing but cold resolve. "Patricia," I said. My attorney stepped forward, a folder of documents in her hands. She moved with practiced confidence, positioning herself where everyone could see. "Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Ashford," Patricia began, her voice carrying legal authority. "You came into this family believing you had found an easy target, an elderly widow with modest savings, a daughter you could manipulate, and a mother-in-law too kind to see you for what you really are." She opened the folder. "You were wrong about everything." Patricia laid out the documents on my coffee table, each one a brick in the wall Thomas had built to protect me. 3 years ago, Thomas Morrison worked with estate attorneys to restructure his wife's assets into irrevocable trusts. These trusts are legally impenetrable. No family member can access, challenge, or claim any portion of them without meeting specific conditions. Vivian's eyes darted to the papers, trying to understand what she was seeing. What assets? She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment. She sews quilts for charity. Catherine Morrison owns an 18% stake in the Belmont Grand Hotel chain, Patricia continued calmly. Acquired as an early investee 23 years ago and held in a separate LLC. She owns 3 rental properties, generating substantial passive income. Her total portfolio is valued at over $1.8 million. She let that number hang in the air. None of it appears on any document you have ever seen. None of it can be touched by you or your husband, ever. The color had returned to Vivian's face, but now it was the red of fury rather than the white of shock. That's impossible. We would have known. You knew only what Thomas wanted you to know. He understood exactly what Marcus was, and he spent his final years ensuring you would never profit from your cruelty. Patricia pulled out another document. The true beneficiary of Catherine's estate is the Sophie Catherine Trust, named for her granddaughter. Catherine serves as trustee until Sophie reaches 21, and there is a critical clause that applies to every family member. She read directly from the page. Any person who demonstrates financial exploitation, abuse, or mistreatment of Catherine Morrison shall be permanently excluded from any inheritance or beneficial interest. Vivian shot to her feet. This is illegal. These documents are fraudulent. Marcus, say something. We'll contest this in court. But Marcus wasn't listening. He sat frozen on the couch, staring at a piece of paper Patricia had quietly handed him moments earlier. His face had gone pale, and his hands trembled as he held the single page covered in familiar handwriting. His own handwriting. What is that? Vivian demanded. Marcus, what are you looking at? Sophie spoke from across the room, her voice quiet but steady. I found it in your desk drawer, Mom, hidden in the back behind your tax documents. You kept it for 3 years. Marcus began to read aloud, his voice cracking. Dear Catherine, I'm sorry for disappearing from your life. Vivian said it was better this way, that you and I needed distance, that our relationship was unhealthy. But she was wrong. I miss you every day. I know I've been a coward. I know I've let you down. I don't know how to escape what my life has become, but I wanted you to know. His voice broke completely. I never stopped loving you. Your son-in-law, Marcus. The letter I had never received. The apology I had waited years to hear. Marcus had written it 3 years ago. Had tried to reach out. Had wanted to repair what Vivian had broken. And she had intercepted it. Hidden it. Let both of us believe the other didn't care. Marcus looked up at his wife, and I saw something shatter behind his eyes. You kept this from me for 3 years. You made me believe she never responded because she didn't want to hear from me. You told me she was too bitter, too stubborn, that I should stop trying. Tears streamed down his face. I thought my mother-in-law hated me. I thought she had given up on me. And the whole time, she never even knew I reached out. Vivian's composure crumbled into desperation. She lunged toward the door, but Daniel was already there, his broad frame blocking the only exit. She spun back toward the room, searching for another escape, finding none. Patricia stepped forward, holding up her phone. We're not finished, Mrs. Ashford. The unauthorized withdrawals from Catherine's account total $43,000. That constitutes theft. Combined with the evidence of your conservatorship plans, the recorded phone calls, the emails, your own admissions about obtaining false dementia diagnoses, we have grounds for criminal elder abuse charges. Vivian's face contorted with rage and fear. You can't prove any of that. We have recordings from your own home obtained legally by your daughter. We have testimony from Jonathan Ashford about what Marcus did to him. We have documentation of every lie you told. Patricia held up her phone. And we have the recording from Roselli's restaurant where you enthusiastically approved a will that disinherited your own child. She paused, letting that sink in. You have 2 choices. Sign the documents renouncing all claims to the Morrison estate and agreeing to repay the stolen funds, or we proceed with criminal charges and let a jury decide your fate. Vivian looked around the room, at the father-in-law Marcus had abandoned, at the daughter she had betrayed, at the husband whose eyes now held only disgust, at the witnesses who had documented her every crime. For the first time since I had known her, she had no move left to make. She snatched the pen from Patricia's hand and began signing, her movements sharp and angry. She didn't bother reading the terms: renunciation of all claims, agreement to repay the stolen funds, waiver of any future contact with Catherine Morrison. When she finished, she threw down the pen. "Are we done?" Daniel stepped forward, his phone in hand. "Not quite. I thought you should know. The video from the hotel restaurant has been connected to your real identity. Someone recognized you from your business website. The comments section is very interested in learning more about the woman who publicly humiliated an elderly mother." He held up his phone, showing a headline that had posted within the hour. "Local executive who humiliated elderly mother has secret family abuse history." "It's trending," Daniel said simply. "Your former business associates have been contacted by journalists. Several have already issued statements distancing themselves from you. Your clients are canceling contacts, and someone, I genuinely don't know who, leaked information about Jonathan's situation to a reporter." The sound that escaped Vivian's throat was not quite human. She grabbed her purse and pushed past Daniel, who stepped aside to let her go. She didn't look back at her husband. She didn't acknowledge her daughter. She simply fled, leaving behind the ruins of a life built on manipulation and cruelty. In the silence that followed her departure, Sophie stood. My granddaughter, this brave young woman who had gathered evidence against her own mother, who had reunited with a grandfather she thought was dead, walked to the center of the room and faced what remained of her family. "I'm going to live with Grandma," she announced. "I'm 14. I can petition the court for custody modification, and after everything that's happened today, I don't think anyone will argue against it." She looked at Jonathan Ashford, still seated in his wheelchair with tears on his weathered cheeks. "And I'm going to get to know my real grandfather, the one they told me was dead. Then she turned to Marcus, and her expression softened with something that might have been pity. "Dad, I don't hate you. I know she manipulated you. I know you were weak, not evil. But I can't watch you be her puppet anymore. I can't live in that house and pretend everything is normal." Then she turned to Marcus, and her expression softened with something that might have been pity. He took a breath. "If you ever want to be my father again, really be my father, you know where to find me." She walked to my side and took my hand. Then Marcus didn't stop her. He sat on my couch with his head bowed, a broken man surrounded by the debris of choices he could never unmake. 6 months have passed since that day in my living room. I'm writing this from the sunroom of a small house by the ocean, the house Thomas and I had dreamed of retiring to during all those years of sacrifice and struggle. The sound of waves reaches me through the open windows, and seabirds wheel overhead against a sky painted in shades of amber and gold. Sophie lives with me now. She transferred to a local high school and has thrived in ways that fill my heart with joy. Her grades are excellent. She's made friends who know nothing of her mother's cruelty or her family's public disgrace. She's preparing for college, writing application essays about resilience and the grandfather she never met, but whose love still shapes her life. Every weekend, she drives to visit Jonathan Ashford at his new care facility, a place with gardens and good food and staff who treat him with the dignity his own son denied him. They're building the relationship Vivian and Marcus stole from them, one conversation at a time. I've established a charitable foundation in Thomas's name, the Thomas Morrison Elder Protection Fund. It provides legal assistance to elderly people facing financial exploitation by family members. Daniel serves on the board. Patricia handles the legal work pro bono. Every person we help is a testament to what Thomas understood better than anyone, that the elderly are not burdens to be managed, but treasures to be protected. Marcus is on his own journey now. He filed for divorce the week after that Sunday gathering. And Vivian didn't contest it. She had already fled the state, her reputation destroyed, her business connections severed, her schemes exposed to public scrutiny. Last I heard, she was living somewhere in Arizona, trying to rebuild under a different name. I don't think about her often. She is no longer my concern. Marcus attends therapy twice a week, working through years of manipulation and the codependency that made him vulnerable to someone like Vivian. He took a job at a small accounting firm. Nothing glamorous, nothing prestigious, just honest work for honest pay. He lives in a modest apartment and sends me a check every month, slowly repaying the money Vivian took from my account. I never asked him to do this. He insisted. He visits once a month. We sit in this sunroom and watch the waves and talk about things that matter. Thomas, Sophie, Jonathan, the mistakes he made, the life he's tried to rebuild. I made my terms clear from the beginning. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Trust is not rebuilt in a day. He is my son-in-law, and I want to help him become a better man. But we start over slowly, honestly, and only as long as he keeps choosing integrity over convenience. Last week, Sophie had a conversation with Marcus that she shared with me afterward. She told him that when she turns 21, she'll have access to everything Thomas left in the trust. She told him that she's decided, if and only if he completes his therapy, stays divorced from Vivienne, and rebuilds genuine relationships with both of us, she will share part of that inheritance with him. Not because he deserves it, she said, but because Grandpa Thomas believed in second chances.